There's a moment in every courtroom when the energy shifts, when a decision is made that can't be undone. And on a Thursday morning in April, that moment arrived for a man who thought he'd already won. His lawyer leaned in and whispered 5 words, just 5, and the color drained from his face. But before we get to that moment, we need to understand how someone can sit in a kitchen for 3 years knowing something catastrophic about their partner and do absolutely nothing. We need to understand the difference between patience and surrender. And we need to understand what happens when the person everyone pitied turns out to have been 3 moves ahead the entire time. This is a story about financial deception, about a marriage that looked perfect on Instagram and YouTube and in all the places that matter when you're selling a lifestyle. But underneath, it was built on money that didn't exist, borrowed against things that were barely worth owning, and held together by a narrative that was completely false. Let me start with what most people don't understand about building something from nothing. It requires sacrifice. It requires someone to do the boring work behind the scenes, the work nobody celebrates, the work nobody even sees. Sarah was 17 years old when she got hired as a file clerk at a law firm. Minimum wage, paper cuts every day, no benefits, no promise of anything better. But she was practical. She'd learned early that the only person who could guarantee her security was herself. By 18, she'd clawed her way into a legal assistant role. She learned how to read contracts, how to spot discrepancies in paperwork, how to organize information in ways that actually mattered. These weren't flashy skills, they were foundational skills, the kind that keep a business functioning. At a client event, she met Marcus. He was 24, confident, charismatic in the way that some people naturally are. He talked about building an empire, about developing property, about creating something that would define him professionally and financially. He spoke as if it was already inevitable. She was 19 when they married. He was ambitious. She was willing to work. By 23, after years of her part-time work combined with his business momentum, something clicked. He asked her to quit her job and manage his company full-time. He needed someone to handle the books, someone to manage clients, someone to coordinate contractors and oversee finances and serve as the person clients trusted when he wasn't around. She became unpaid: bookkeeper, administrator, designer, marketing coordinator, event planner, everything except partner, everything except equal, everything except credited. For 11 years, this was her life. While he attended industry events and received awards and gave speeches about his vision, she was handling the spreadsheets, she was managing the contractors, she was making sure money actually moved and projects actually completed. And then something shifted. It's subtle when it happens. A few criticisms here, meetings he didn't tell her about, late nights that became routine, a distance that grew so gradually she couldn't pinpoint when it started. On a Tuesday evening, he sat her down at their kitchen table and told her he wanted a divorce. He wanted the house, the cars, the business, everything. He delivered it like a business proposition, like he was negotiating with a vendor, like their 15-year marriage was a transaction that was now complete. What happened next is what usually happens in these situations. Lawyers got involved. Documents were drawn up. She was moved to the guest room. He began bringing his new partner around almost immediately, a woman younger than their marriage, younger than most of their relationship. She wore his partner's clothes and used her grandmother's things and walked through the house like it had always been hers. The humiliation was systematic. He canceled her credit cards. He suggested she move out. His mother showed up and packed her belongings in garbage bags, deciding what she deserved to keep and what belonged to him. Her own clothes went, her furniture didn't. Family photographs were debated. Her grandmother's recipe box was nearly confiscated before his mother thought better of it. And everyone agreed he was being more than fair, generous even. She was getting a settlement. She should be grateful. She should accept what he was offering and move on. But here's what nobody understood. Here's what she'd never told anyone. 3 years earlier, while he was working late night after night, she was reconciling the company books. It was just due diligence, normal accounting work. Except she found something odd, a transfer to an account she didn't recognize, then another, then a pattern. She stayed up until 3 in the morning following the paper trail. What she uncovered was a financial catastrophe masquerading as success. The house had 3 mortgages against it, not one, 3. The first loan was $400,000. The second, taken out 4 years prior, was $350,000. The third, 2 years old, was another $350,000. In total, they owed $1.1 million on a house worth approximately $850,000. They were underwater by $250,000 on their primary asset. The business was worse. Lines of credit were maxed out. Back taxes were owed. Vendors were unpaid. Equipment loans were outstanding. In total, the company that he bragged about at parties, that he presented as his crowning achievement, carried nearly $500,000 in accumulated debt. The cars weren't even owned. They were leased with balloon payments due. But where had the money gone? She dug further. What she discovered was a portrait of excess and delusion. Cryptocurrency investments had evaporated. Gambling losses were substantial. There was an apartment somewhere, rented for a woman she didn't know the name of. $60,000 in rent and furnishings for a life she wasn't part of. Watches and suits and trips. $85,000 more in lifestyle expenses that never came home. In total, they were approaching $2 million in debt against roughly $1.6 million in actual assets. They were insolvent by hundreds of thousands of dollars. The empire was a mirage. Her first instinct was to confront him, to demand answers, to scream and cry and fight. But she knew him. She'd watched him operate for years. She understood how he deflected criticism, how he reframed conversations, how he made other people feel crazy for questioning him. And she understood something else. If she showed her hand now, he might try to take control of the one thing that was actually hers. She had money of her own, not much by his standards, but real. An IRA from her law firm days, rolled over but never touched. It had grown to roughly $180,000, and her grandmother had left her $340,000 in a will that was very specific about the purpose. This money is for you alone, not for your husband, not for a business, for you. She'd kept those funds separate for 6 years, never mixed them with his finances, never used them for household expenses. That was $500,000 in assets that existed in an entirely different legal sphere. So instead of confronting him, she protected herself. She worked with her uncle, a retired accountant, to create an irrevocable trust for her son. She transferred her IRA and her inheritance into that trust. Her name wasn't on it as a beneficiary. His name certainly wasn't. It was for the boy's future, college, a first home eventually, a safety net that nobody could access or claim. Then she documented everything, every mortgage document, every hidden account, every suspicious transaction. She printed copies and stored them at her sister's house. She made another set and put them in a safe deposit box. She saved everything on an encrypted drive. And then she waited. She knew he would leave eventually. That's what men like him do. They get bored, or they find someone younger, or they convince themselves they deserve more. She just had to be ready when it happened. 3 years she waited. 3 years of watching him dig the hole deeper. 3 years of attending dinner parties and speaking with his colleagues while knowing their entire financial foundation was rotting from the inside. 3 years of smiling while he got more reckless, more confident, more certain that he'd built something real. She became very good at patience. She became very good at pretending she didn't know that everything they had was borrowed against things they didn't actually own. When he finally demanded the divorce, when he insisted on taking everything, she almost had to suppress a smile. He wasn't asking for assets. He was demanding liability. He just didn't understand that yet. She hired a lawyer, someone her old firm recommended. Nina, 52 years old, sharp, absolutely intolerant of nonsense or self-pity. She laid out the documents one by one: the mortgages, the business loans, the tax liens, the lease obligations, the hidden accounts. 3 years of meticulous financial investigation, all organized and dated and cross-referenced. When Nina finished reading, something in her expression changed. The pity that had been there was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like respect. "You've known about this the entire time," Nina said. It was a statement, not a question. "I've been waiting for him to leave," she replied. "I knew he would eventually, and when he demanded everything, he demanded all of it. He just doesn't understand yet." What Sarah understood, and what Nina quickly grasped, was the architecture of the trap. When he signed for all the assets, he would be legally assuming all the liabilities. The mortgages would become his sole responsibility. The business debts would transfer entirely to him. The lease obligations, the tax liens, everything would become his problem alone. And because she'd never commingled her inheritance with his finances, because the trust for her son was legally separate, her actual assets were protected. Over the next 3 months, she performed a masterclass in losing. She showed up to mediation sessions with red eyes and trembling hands. She spoke softly and hesitantly. She asked for almost nothing: $50,000 in cash, her personal belongings, shared custody of her son. That was it. He agreed immediately. He probably expected her to fight for half of everything. Instead, she was asking for crumbs. He looked at her across the mediation table with something that might have been pity, like he was graciously ending her suffering. With each passing week, his arrogance grew. He stopped being careful. He stopped pretending to be reasonable. He started bragging to his golf buddies about how easily she'd folded. He told them she hadn't even fought, that she'd accepted his offer without pushing back, that she was weak. His mother did the same thing at her book club, her church. Everywhere she went, she'd repeat the same refrain: "Vincent is keeping everything. That woman didn't get a dime. I always knew she wasn't strong enough." To celebrate his victory, he bought himself a $15,000 watch. He wore it to the next mediation session, making sure she noticed. He also took his new partner to the expensive French restaurant where Sarah and Vincent had celebrated their 10th anniversary. He posted about it on social media. Life is good when you're with the right person. He meant the person who didn't know about the financial collapse yet. Meanwhile, his new partner was redecorating the house. New furniture, new art, and she painted the kitchen gray, not the sage green that Sarah had spent 3 weeks perfecting. Not the color she'd chosen for its warmth and light. Flat, builder-grade gray. She had one person she thought she could trust. A friend of 20 years, Diane. They'd known each other since high school. They'd been through relationships and breakups and babies and everything in between. After the separation, Diane was constantly checking in, calling with concern, asking how Sarah was holding up, offering to listen, offering to support her. Except information had a way of getting back to Marcus. Plans Sarah mentioned to Diane somehow became known to him before she acted on them. Apartments she was considering looking at, he'd comment about being too expensive for her. It took Sarah a while to understand. When she looked back, she could see it clearly. The way Diane lit up when Marcus entered a room, the way she complimented him, the way she asked about him constantly.
Diane had been carrying a torch for Sarah's husband for 15 years, and Marcus, who collected admirers the way some people collect achievements, knew exactly how to use it. He made her feel special, important, not like other women. He probably hinted that they might get together after the divorce, gave her just enough hope to keep her loyal. 20 years of friendship sold out for some attention and empty promises. But the worst part wasn't Marcus, wasn't his mother, wasn't even Diane. It was her son. Tyler was 15 years old and he was watching everything. He saw his father with his new partner. He saw his father's mother packing his mother's belongings into garbage bags. He saw the way his father looked at his mother like she was irrelevant. And Marcus was working on him methodically, dripping poison in his ear day after day. Your mom is making this difficult. I just want everyone to be happy. She's the one dragging this out. I'm trying to be fair, but she won't cooperate." Tyler started pulling away. Not angry exactly, just distant, confused. He didn't know who to believe, and his father was very convincing. Sarah could lose the house, she could lose the money, she could lose everything she'd spent 15 years building, but watching her son look at her like she was the problem, that was the knife that actually cut. That was the wound that bled. The night before the final hearing, Marcus texted her, "Thank you for not making this ugly. I appreciate that." She stared at that message for a long time. 15 years of marriage, 15 years of building his business, raising their son, managing his life, and he was thanking her for not fighting back while he threw her away. She texted back, "I just want what's best for Tyler." What was best for Tyler, she didn't say, was a trust fund that nobody could touch, a future that was protected, and a mother who was about to teach him the most important lesson of his life. The courtroom was on a Thursday morning in April. She wore a simple dark blue dress, no jewelry, her hair in a low bun. She looked exactly like what everyone expected, defeated, exhausted, a woman who had nothing left to fight with. Marcus arrived first in his best suit, the Armani suit she'd helped him choose years earlier. His $15,000 watch was visible when he shook hands with his lawyer. He looked relaxed, confident, like a man about to finalize a very good deal. The judge was Patricia Holden, 60 years old, 30 years on the family law bench. She'd seen every trick, every manipulation, every lie that couples could throw at each other. When Sarah confirmed that she understood what she was agreeing to, when she stated that she was voluntarily accepting the settlement, something in the judge's expression suggested doubt. Judge Holden seemed to be weighing whether to push harder, to order a deeper investigation, to protect Sarah from what appeared to be a terrible decision. But Sarah's lawyer was right there, Nina. Sarah was speaking clearly. She was an adult making her own choice. What more could the judge do? The papers were distributed, page after page of legal documents, signatures required on every third page or so. Marcus signed eagerly. He wanted this done. He wanted to get back to his new life, to his new partner, to his freedom. Sarah signed slowly, deliberately. Each stroke of her pen was careful and precise. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. She was going to savor it. Then the lawyer on the other side, Harold, reached the attachment, the liability disclosure statement. Every single debt, every mortgage, every loan, every obligation tied to those assets, stated clearly in black and white legal language, devastating language. Sarah watched his face as he read, watched the confusion flicker across his features, watched him flip back and forth like he might be misreading the numbers. He leaned over to Marcus and whispered urgently, "Mr. Mercer," Harold said quietly, "we need to talk. We need to talk right now." Marcus waved him off. "Not now. We're almost done." But Harold's voice had become more urgent. "You're assuming all of the debt. All of it. It's right here." For the first time, Marcus actually looked at what he was signing. His eyes scanned the numbers. The house, $1.1 million owed. Actual value, $850,000. The business, $480,000 in accumulated debt. The vehicles, $115,000 in lease obligations. Additional personal obligations totaling $200,000. Total debt, approximately $1.9 million. Net value of everything he just claimed, negative $300,000. He didn't win the lottery. He won a debt sentence. Marcus suddenly stood up. His chair scraped against the floor. "This is wrong." He looked at Sarah, then at the judge, then back at the papers. "She hid this from me. This is fraud." The judge's voice became sharp. "Mr. Mercer, sit down. These numbers are in the documentation, the documents you're signing, the documents your attorney has reviewed." "I told you to get an audit," Harold said quietly. "I told you to have someone verify the assets before this hearing. You refused. I have that in writing." Silence. The judge looked at the document in front of her. the refusal to audit, the document Harold had insisted Marcus sign, the document that explicitly stated Harold had advised a comprehensive financial review, and Marcus rejected that advice. So you were advised to verify the financial condition of these assets. You decided not to pursue that review. You signed a document acknowledging that choice. She paused and looked directly at Marcus. Your wife has not hidden anything. These are your assets. These are your debts, your liabilities, your responsibility. She looked down at her papers and then back at him. The agreement stands. Marcus looked at Sarah. His face had gone completely white. How long did you know? His voice was thin. How long have you known about this? Sarah met his eyes calmly. I was your accountant for 11 years, Marcus. I knew about all of it. For a moment, the courtroom seemed to stop. Everything seemed to freeze in that space between his understanding and the full weight of what he'd just done to himself. Sarah stood, smoothed her dress, picked up her bag. Then she looked at him one more time. You said you wanted everything except me. You wanted everything except our son. I gave you exactly what you asked for. She walked out of that courtroom without looking back. In the corridor, she could hear Marcus screaming at Harold, demanding to know how this happened, threatening lawsuits, blaming everyone except himself. The implosion that followed was swift. Within 2 weeks, his new partner realized what was actually happening. She left in the middle of the night with a note that simply said, "This isn't what I signed up for." The house couldn't be sold because he owed more than it was worth. The business began defaulting. Vendors filed lawsuits. Credit lines were frozen. Within 3 months, he was meeting with bankruptcy attorneys. The man who'd bragged about his empire was now calculating which assets he could possibly protect from creditors. The answer was almost nothing. His mother's Christmas letter that year was noticeably shorter, something about Vincent exploring new opportunities. Translation: Vincent was drowning. Diane called Sarah about a week after the hearing. Her voice was trembling. I didn't know it was this bad. I'm so sorry, Alexis. I never thought you were guilty of anything. I know that now. Sarah didn't offer forgiveness. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some friendships can't survive that kind of betrayal. Instead, she simply said, I think it's time we stopped talking.
Tyler, her 15-year-old son, had figured out most of what happened before anyone else. Not because Sarah told him, but because he'd watched his father's excuses stop making sense. A $15,000 watch, but claims that money was tight. Shopping bags piling up, but complaints about being broke. The disconnect was too obvious to ignore. One evening, Tyler came to Sarah's small apartment and sat at her second-hand kitchen table. He looked at her with his father's eyes, but with something his father had lost long ago. Is Dad actually rich? He asked quietly. Sarah looked at her son for a long moment. What do you think? He was quiet, processing. I think something's not right. I think he's pretending. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Trust me. Just wait a little longer. Trust me. About 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Marcus showed up at Sarah's apartment building. He looked different, thinner, not healthy, dark circles, wrinkled clothes, no expensive watch. He looked like someone who'd been through a war and lost. He stood in her doorway. Can we talk? He asked. Maybe we can figure something out. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him. This man she'd loved for almost half her life. This man who'd thrown her away like garbage. This man who was now drowning in the consequences of his own choices. You asked for everything except Tyler, she said calmly. You got exactly what you wanted. Goodbye, Marcus. She closed the door. Through the peephole, she watched him stand in the hallway for 10 minutes, gathering the courage to leave. She ate ice cream while she watched. Best show she'd ever seen. That evening, after Tyler went to bed, Sarah sat in her small living room. Her grandmother's photo was on the shelf. the recipe box next to it, the one thing Marcus's mother had almost taken, the thing that mattered most. "You were right about everything, Grandma," she said quietly. "Keep your own money, know your worth, and never let anyone make you feel small." The apartment was small, nothing like the house she'd lived in for 15 years, but it was hers. Every paint color, every piece of furniture, every decision, hers. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was free. She'd enrolled in interior design courses at the community college, a dream she'd abandoned when she was 23 to help her husband build his empire. She was rebuilding it for herself now. Her first real client was a woman named Sandra, 52 years old, just finishing a 28-year marriage. Sandra stood in her empty new apartment, looking lost. "How do you start over?" Sandra asked. Sarah thought about that for a moment. One room at a time, one color at a time, one day at a time. They painted Sandra's kitchen sage green. When Sandra saw it, she cried. "Happy tears," she said, "the color of new beginnings." Here's what Sarah understood that most people never learn. Sometimes the greatest power you have isn't action, it's patience, it's documentation, it's understanding that the people who underestimate you stop watching you, they stop being careful around you, and that's exactly when you learn everything. Marcus thought he was winning while she was playing a much longer game, a game he didn't even know was happening. The irony, the real poetry of it, is that his own arrogance was the tool that brought him down. His refusal to listen to his lawyer, his absolute certainty that he was smarter than everyone else, his belief that Sarah was too broken to be a threat, that made him careless, made him reckless, made him sign papers without reading them. He gave her everything she needed to win while bragging about his own victory. And somewhere in this story, there's a question that might be uncomfortable to sit with. How many people do we underestimate? How many people who appear broken or defeated are actually 3 moves ahead? How many of us have misjudged someone's silence for weakness instead of strategic patience? Tyler didn't need to hear the full story. He figured it out himself by watching the inconsistencies in his father's narrative. He saw through the performance because Sarah had lived her values in front of him. She'd chosen stability over spectacle. She'd worked quietly instead of boasting. She'd protected what mattered instead of displaying what she had. And when everything collapsed, he understood why his mother was still standing while his father was on his knees. That's the lesson that Sarah never had to teach him. He learned by watching someone choose integrity when it would have been easier to choose revenge.